Hi everyone, I'm Moyo, a UIS graduate student. I'm so excited that you have decided to join us today. Now remember, this is a live show, so we want to make sure that everyone's engaged. Be sure to use our hashtag throughout the day, Bridging the Gap. Now let's head over to the TEDx stage to see what's taking place.
Good morning. My name is Mason Segerbrook. I'm a UIS graduate student, and I'm the co-director of today's event. We want to welcome you to the very first TEDx event at University of Illinois Springfield. And since the pandemic, this is our very first live audience, along with the online viewers. We are so excited to have you all here today. The committee and I have worked really hard to bring all these speakers together, and we are so excited to see what they're going to share with you today. Enjoy the show. Our first speaker today is Dr. Sarah Webb.
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Sarah Webb, a professor of English at the University of Illinois Springfield, and also the creator of Colorism Healing. The title of my talk today is How Can We Heal from the Shades of Colorism? As you listen to my speech, I invite you to think about an aspect of your life that may still need healing. And I hope that you take this talk not as the final word on this subject, but as an opportunity to begin further dialogue within your families, your communities, or with yourself, and begin to bridge the gap between hurt and healing. Thank you, and please enjoy. Hello, everyone. So my mom tells a story of when I was about 5 years old. We were visiting some extended relatives, and I sat on the floor playing in my own little make-believe world. Something I still do today, actually. But during that visit, some older relatives, great aunts I believe, started complimenting my older sister, singing her praises, saying how pretty she was, telling my mom to watch out for her because she is going to break some hearts one day. So I hear this. I hear what they're saying about my older sister, but I also hear loud and clear what they're not saying about me. So then that's when my mom overhears me whisper to myself, that's because she's light-skinned. What I know now is that I was witnessing and observing something called colorism. See if this gets on. There we go. So colorism is less often talked about, but it is a global issue that rivals things like racism, sexism, classism, and the other isms. It's a system of oppression that privileges lighter skin tones over darker skin tones. One thing to remember about colorism versus racism is that color is not a synonym for race. People can be the same race and have different skin tones, and people can be different races and have very similar skin tones. What I experienced at 5 was an example of colorism because my sister and I have the same mother, we have the same father, we are the same race. So these women were distinguishing between us based on the particular shade of our complexions. Growing up in a household as a dark-skinned girl with a light-skinned mother and a light-skinned sister, the differences in how people treated us was very apparent to me. And the notion that I could not be a heartbreaker because I was darker skinned showed up many more times throughout my life. And while heartbreaker status was supposedly inaccessible to me, heartbreak seemed readily available. So then we might ask, how does a person heal from something like the heartbreaking reality of colorism? People say it starts at home. If that's the case, then where does it end? Today, I'd like to share with you just one lesson that I've learned along my own healing journey. Throughout my life, throughout my childhood, teenage years, and even as a young adult, I suffered from colorism, but alone and in silence. I didn't think anyone would listen or understand or care, and I was afraid to speak about it. I was afraid that people would judge me, that they would label me jealous or insecure or accuse me of being too sensitive or causing greater division. And yet, despite those years of fear and silence, here I am today talking about colorism. Yes. And here's why. Here's what changed for me. I was in my early to mid-20s teaching high school English back in my hometown, and I adored my students. But it surprised me to hear them say things like, "I wish I was light-skinned like my mom." Or, "I don't like this picture of myself because I look too black on here." Or, "I'm less proud of myself because I got darker over the summer." And even, "I don't like dark-skinned people when I first meet them." Hearing multiple students express these negative feelings and negative attitudes about dark skin, about their own dark skin, as well as the dark skin of others, that was yet another form of heartbreak for me. But that's when I knew I had to say something. I chose to break the silence because I wanted to break the cycle for the generations coming after me. Now, I'm a writer. So when I thought about how I could personally address this issue, I turned to my writing skills. And in the wee hours of a July morning in 2013, I started a new blog. I knew a couple of things. One, I wanted the blog to be a source of information to raise awareness about colorism. And two, I wanted it to be an opportunity to discuss what we can do about colorism. What are some possible solutions? So I thought long and hard about a title, and I settled on Colorism Healing. Now, the colorism part might be obvious. It's literally the subject of the blog. But that healing word has three key components. The first component is individual healing, and that's primarily what the focus of my talk is today. Individual healing includes personal mental health, but also reprogramming our unconscious biases about certain skin tones. Now, the second key component is healing relationships between individuals and amongst groups of people. And the third key component that we cannot forget is systemic change across the larger society. So I started that blog, and I ended up stepping into a new era of my life. And over the years, I've had the chance to meet thousands of beautiful souls from around the world. And in particular, it is my International Colorism Healing Writing Contest that perfectly illustrated for me how colorism is truly a global issue and that we are not alone in our experiences of colorism. One of the contestants said, "I thought it was just me. I thought it was just in my culture." And so many people come to this work and have their eyes opened to the vast diversity of people who all have something to say about colorism. Having the honor to collect these stories and facilitate this chorus of diverse voices from different countries, different ages, different races, different ethnicities, different languages, that continues to reaffirm my faith in the healing process. So I've learned more about colorism, I've learned more about healing, but I've also learned more about myself. No surprises there. But in particular, I've learned more about my relationship to my younger self, to this little girl. I call her Little Sarah, and I can still feel her with me. I still recognize her expressions of sadness, of hurt, of anger, and disappointment. I can still feel her broken heart. I think of our relationship like a set of nesting dolls where there's adult me, Big Sarah, and inside are all the smaller, younger versions of me. So I still carry Little Sarah within me, which means the healing work I do in the present also extends back to her as well. And it was only a few years ago, so relatively recently, when I found the words to really express the healing work I had been doing. There's a song, because with me, there is always a song. But this particular song is called Breathe by Sanibou C. Great song. I suggest you listen right after this event. But within the song lyrics, there's a vivid contrast between home, where they love my broken heart, as opposed to here, where my beauty and my worth are simply a given. So I was listening to this song on repeat when I saw an analogy to colorism. Colorism is that home where they love my broken heart. It is growing up a dark-skinned Black girl in a society founded on white supremacy and anti-Blackness. It is a birthplace where your darker complexion will have a negative impact on how you're treated by school teachers, by police officers, judges, jurors, lawyers, doctors, nurses, grocery store clerks, your managers at work, and yes, far too often, your own family. So colorism may indeed start at home, but here's where I believe it ends on the personal level. Healing is when here, that place where my value is never questioned and never denied, becomes me. I am that place. And then I become home. I am home. To be able to say I am home, not as a matter of geographic location or physical space, but as a state of being. That's healing to me. And so, after all the heartbreak, and after all the joys, after meeting each and every individual that I've met on this journey, hey y'all, I think about my 5-year-old self a lot. And here's what I'd like to say to her and to all of you here now. Who wants to be a heartbreaker anyway? Just wait. You'll see healing hearts. Now that's really where it's at. Thank you.
So I think we can all agree that throughout the past year, we've had to learn how to adapt and connect virtually. It's safe and it's still fun. So we want you guys to use the hashtag Bridging the Gap that was created specifically for today's event. We want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear your, opinions. We want to hear what you would have to say if you were a TEDx speaker. So leave the hashtag Bridging the Gap and share your thoughts. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what you've enjoyed. You may just win a prize that one of our amazing sponsors provided today.
Hi everyone, I'm Dean Cantu, Associate Dean and Director of the Department of Education, Counseling, and Leadership at Bradley University, and most importantly, the father of 3, the oldest of which is a graduate student here at UIS. The title of my talk today is a question. Why are we obsessed with the image of death? I hope one of the takeaways from the talk today is a better understanding of why we, as members of the human race, are obsessed with trying to give visual form, personify death. This can be traced throughout history, from the Black Plague of the 14th century and the Spanish flu of the early 20th century to the current COVID-19 pandemic. My intent is to try to create a bridge of understanding between both our fascination with and our fear of death. Come with me as we attempt to answer this question regarding why we are obsessed with personifying or giving visual form to death.
Indeed, throughout history, we have been obsessed with death. In particular, the personification of death, giving death an image or form. The philosopher Stephen Cave refers to this as the mortality paradox, in which, on the one hand, we concede to the fact that one day we will all die. Yet, on the other hand, our very state of non-existence is something that we cannot conceive of. Death, therefore, presents itself as something that is both inevitable and impossible. We plant this seed of thought at a very early age. Take, for example, the prayer, "Now I lay me down to sleep." There's a line in there that goes as follows: "If I should die before I wake." In effect, we are reminding young children of the fact that death is inevitable. And we're also presenting this image of death as something that can come and take you away in the night. This aesthetic representation of death, however, lets us repress our own knowledge of the reality of death, of our mortality, if you will. Because now we can see death in someone else, or we can see death as an image. Within the past year, we don't need to be reminded of death on a large scale with the coronavirus pandemic. Indeed, as we look back on 2020, we see images that remind us of what we have endured, the pandemic itself and the coronavirus. In fact, that image there of the coronavirus that was introduced to us by the CDC in 2020 has become synonymous not only with the coronavirus itself, but with death, the death that followed. Our personification of COVID-19 is nothing new. We have attempted to personify diseases throughout history. In fact, when we introduced the coronavirus in the current pandemic, we provided orientation to it, if you will, in newscast after newscast, where we introduced this image that from that time forward, every night was going to be up there on the screen as we talked about the death toll, the rising death toll. It could have been other images. The NIH and the CDC had a selection of different images that they could have used, but they settled upon this one here, the morphology of the coronavirus itself. And this is the image now that you see night after night. Again, throughout history, we've seen diseases personified as devil-like characters, as the Grim Reaper, monsters emerging from the sea, as specters or ghosts hovering over cities. A century ago, with the influenza epidemic known as the Spanish flu, we see it as this menacing character, inflicting pain and destruction. Thomas Mann reminds us that all interest in disease and death is merely an expression of an interest in life itself. It's just now that we're in the 21st century, we see it take different forms. It comes in the form of the World Health Organization dashboard or the CDC dashboard, where at a moment's notice we can go in and get real-time data on the death toll itself. But the image du jour for the current pandemic of death is, in fact, the CDC coronavirus. We see it every night. In fact, we've given it a moniker. The spiky blob was a name the New York Times gave to it last year, and it seems to have stuck. And it is reminiscent of a 20th century sci-fi film, The Blob, again, about another menace that was here to destroy the world. There really is a nexus or a crossroads between the personification of the COVID coronavirus and of the personification of death itself. In fact, if you go back and look at the history of the personification of death, it really is born out of the idea that death itself is an idea without any content. It's unthinkable. It's inexplicable. It's a conceptual je ne sais quoi, something that we cannot fathom. And yet we engage our imagination to imagine the unimaginable, death itself, and thereby giving it form. Whether it's a century ago in depicting the cholera epidemic in Europe or the current COVID-19 pandemic, throughout history, we've tried to create this bond between both history and biology by depicting death, giving it form. Probably one of the best illustrations throughout history has been that of the would-be victim of death challenging death to one last game, one last chance to live another day. It goes all the way back to 1200 BC with the illustration in the tomb of Queen Nefertari, where the queen is playing the game of Senate against an invisible character thought to be death. And we've seen it more popularly throughout history as that person challenging death to a game of chess. In artwork, in film, animated series, and most recently, as a healthcare worker challenging death to a game of coronavirus chess. A lot of these depictions of death can trace their genesis back to the Black Plague of the 14th century, also known as the Black Death. This is where we start to see an attempt to try to domesticate the death on a large scale, try to make sense of it by giving it form. The most popular form was the skeletal character wielding a scythe, which eventually would be known as the Grim Reaper. Again, trying to domesticate that which we knew that we could not control. This painting, famous painting of the Black Death, the Triumph of Death, actually comes from a 2020 online article talking about the popularity of a Netflix series on the Black Death that was trending because of the current pandemic. In fact, this is what we see time and time again within the current pandemic, going back to the Black Death and trying to look at the current coronavirus pandemic through the lens of that time period here. Sam Knight, in this article in The New Yorker, talks about reading about the Black Death with his daughter during the coronavirus outbreak. Rather macabre series of bedtime stories, I'm sure. The New Statesman article here reminds us that the Black Death is still haunting us and it's still part of our collective memory. And that's why we go back and we retrieve that. In fact, the two most popular depictions of death itself that we see resurrected during the current pandemic are the Grim Reaper and the Plague Doctor. Whether it's this 19th century painting or this 2020 political cartoon of the Grim Reaper on horseback, again, our attempt is try to take that which was threatening to us, that was rather shapeless in form, and give it form, make it visible once again so we can control death, or so we think. The same thing is the case with the Plague Doctor, sometimes referred to as Dr. Beak or Dr. Beaky, centuries-old painting of it in a 2020 political cartoon, reminding us that our attempt to try to personify death is something that cuts across all cultures at all times. Indeed, as the Washington Post points out here, the image du jour for the current pandemic of death is the Grim Reaper. We see it in online publications talking about and equating COVID-19 to the Grim Reaper. We've seen it in satirical works, such as a lawyer who was protesting the opening of Florida beaches this past year, dressed up as the Grim Reaper, or in a Texas A&M Onion-like publication talking about the Grim Reaper accepting a fraternity bid last fall when they opened up campus again. Looking at the Black Death through that prism, trying to make sense of COVID-19. And that's what this is about. It's a search for meaning. A search for meaning amidst something that seems inexplicable, something with no meaning whatsoever. And it's our attempt to try to imagine death is something that is the radical opposite of our own being. And the goal there is to provide us with a focal point for our search for ourselves. Again, the dance macabre is invoked here as part of our lens through which we can view the Black Death. The last image of the Black Death, or of the angel of death, is one that we see invoked again in the current pandemic. The angel of death who comes to take us away in our hour of need, who comes to comfort us. It's something that we've seen time and time again throughout history, and it's also something that we've invoked in the current coronavirus. So as we look back on the unfathomable toll that the coronavirus has taken over the course of the last year, and as we find ourselves having completed 4 seasons of the pandemic and entering into yet another cycle of the seasons, we find ourselves doing something that we've done throughout history, and that is trying to give form to death so that we can give death meaning, but also, along the way, give meaning to life. For in the end, our understanding of death is a prerequisite for our understanding of life. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Melissa Hostetter. I'm a 7th grade language arts teacher at Washington Middle School, a literacy advocate, and a graduate student in education at the University of Illinois at Springfield. The title of my talk is, Can We Afford to Ignore the Science of Reading? Throughout my talk today, I hope you gain a better understanding of why effective reading instruction is so important for our children and our society. I hope we can bridge the gap between data and instruction. Enjoy. In 2013, Atul Gawande wrote a piece for The New Yorker about slow ideas. These are ideas that, despite mounds of evidence and research, fail to take off. Gawande tells the story of the inception of anesthesia and antiseptics. Both were seen as promising new ideas in the mid-1860s, but only one of these groundbreaking developments took off. It was anesthesia. Anesthesia addressed an immediate issue: pain during surgery. Antiseptics, however, addressed an invisible problem: germs. Antiseptics were not adopted until a generation later. Slow ideas have always been with us. Climate change. Too much sugar is bad for you. Think about how long it took to convince people that seatbelts save lives. As a teacher, I'm here today to talk to you about another long-simmering slow idea. Structured phonics is the most effective way to teach children how to read. Phonics is connecting the sounds from our oral language to the letters or groups of letters that represent those sounds in an alphabetic writing system. Human beings learn to speak in the early years of life. Babies develop speech as they hear it from their caregivers. Speaking is intuitive to humans. We have been speaking for so long that our brains have evolved a language center. We are hardwired for speech, which means that given adequate exposure to oral language, we will become proficient in its use, no instruction required. However, we are not hardwired to read. Our brains need explicit instruction that literally rewires it, creating connections that would not otherwise exist. In public schools today, we teach reading as if it is as natural as speaking. We teach reading as if it is a skill to absorb, not a skill to be explicitly taught. Currently, we teach children letter sounds, sight words to memorize, and encourage them to use context, such as pictures, to decipher words. This method is known as balanced literacy, and it has been the most commonly used method to teach reading since the 1980s. Essentially, children are presented with some knowledge and then are left to create meaning from that knowledge. Let me give you an example. When I taught kindergarten, I would give my students small books called leveled readers. Within the pages of these books were words that corresponded with pictures on the page. As we would get ready to read, as the teacher, I would use a series of cues or prompts to guide my students. So if the sentence was, "I have a pet cat," I would remind my students that they knew the words I and have as sight words. I would then maybe encourage them to get their mouth ready to say the p in pet. I would then usually point to the picture of the cat to draw their attention to that. With enough cues, the students would recite the words. The next year, I jumped up to 4th grade, where it became quickly apparent that many of my students did not have any strategies for sounding out longer words. The pictures were gone, and the guessing strategies no longer worked because the text was too complex. As a teacher, I should have known how to help them, but I didn't know because I had never been taught. That feeling of frustration led me down the road to structured phonics. Structured phonics involves teaching all letter sounds, how those sounds work together, and how to break those sounds apart. This is probably the point in the talk where you are wondering, this all sounds familiar. Are you sure we don't teach phonics in schools? Well, like everything in education, it's a little bit more complicated than it should be. Yes, all schools teach phonics, but most schools do not teach a structured and systematic phonics curriculum. Throughout the 80s and 90s, reading scores began to fall so much that Congress convened a national reading panel to look at all of the reading research up until that point. The evidence was clear. Structured phonics was the most effective way to teach children how to read. It led to the greatest gains in reading accuracy for children. Study after study shows that phonics in the early grades works. And yet, we are still teaching children to read with the balanced literacy method. Reading scores have barely budged in 30 years, and people of color and low-income people have suffered the most. In 2019, the National Assessment for Educational Progress revealed data that showed that only 37% of American 12th graders were reading proficiently. Only 15% of Black 12th graders were reading proficiently. Now, this is news to you, but this is not news in education circles. The data has looked like this for the past 30 years. Excuse me, I'm super nervous. Hang on just one second. So this begs the question, why do we ignore this data? Do we really believe that people have a civil right to read? Now, we often only talk about children when we talk about reading research, but those children become adults. Today's struggling reader is tomorrow's partially illiterate adult. Illiterate is a very strong word, one often reserved for developing nations, but illiteracy is alive and well here in the United States. Only 48% of adults are reading at a level that allows them to identify and interpret information that is lengthy and complicated. And 14% of adults cannot read well enough to fill out a job application. Reading poorly as an adult means that going to vocational school or college or entering the workforce will be exponentially more difficult. And the ramifications extend far beyond employment. How does a person with such low skills understand a health diagnosis and participate in their own health care? How does that person read their own mail or a rental agreement? How does that person read a ballot initiative? That individual's pain has and will continue to become our collective pain, because when an adult does not read well, it impacts their economy, the public health, and our democracy. Phonics advocates have been sounding the alarm for years, but changing the way we teach reading is a very slow idea. So let's take a look at what it would take to switch from a balanced literacy method to a structured phonics method. Number 1, train education professors in the science of reading. Number 2, schools of education need to train teachers in training. And number 3, school districts will need to adopt and purchase new curriculum and train existing teachers accordingly. Practically everyone involved would need to abandon their old ways. And for many, balanced literacy is the only theory and method that they know. We would put in a lot of difficult and expensive work for an eventual reward. Now, some states are well on this path due to legislation that has essentially forced a change. However, we know with other social and cultural movements, the legislation is only a part. For an issue to be successful, you must have buy-in. You must talk about it and give the idea a lot of oxygen. And the good news is that this is happening. Teachers across the country are talking about the need for phonics. Once hushed conversations are now out in the open. Parent advocacy groups have sprung up across the nation, and legislation has passed in multiple states that is bringing evidence-based teaching back to the classroom. The idea is picking up speed. So where do we go from here? Well, it's important to note that phonics will not solve all reading comprehension issues. Poverty, trauma, vocabulary instruction, and content knowledge all play a role. But shouldn't we start somewhere? Instructional methods are something that schools can actually control. In 2015, the state of Mississippi decided to get serious about raising reading scores. Legislation allocated money for all elementary teachers to be retrained in the science of reading and phonics instruction. Guess which state was the only state to make reading gains in 2019? How can we make phonics a nationwide movement and not a piecemeal state-by-state intervention? Well, I am a firm believer that we can do this through education, legislation, and old-fashioned grassroots organizing. We have to keep talking about this issue, and we need to keep asking the question, why do we ignore the data? Why are we okay with poor reading scores? If you feel inspired today to see this idea come to light, go talk to someone. Your child's teacher, a school district administrator, the director of a school of education. Because we can no longer sit back and rely on adult literacy programs and prison volunteers to teach our fellow human beings how to read. At the end of the day, this is not about teaching children. This is about teaching future adults. Yes, children need to read in order to learn, but adults need to read in order to live, to participate in society, to be a citizen. So help us move this slow idea along, because school years come to an end, our students move on, and typically, we have no idea what happens to them. All we have is the data. And we can turn that data around because we know what works. The research is abundant and clear. Phonics is an idea worth spreading. Thank you.
Hey there, I hate to do this, but we have to take a quick 10-minute break. We'll be right back, and we want you to stay engaged in this quick break. So we're going to allow you to learn a little bit more about some of our TEDx speakers by reading their bios. We'll be right back. Hold tight, and I hope you guys are still using that hashtag Bridging the Gap.
Hi, my name's Karen Whitney, and I'm the Interim Chancellor at the University of Illinois Springfield. And I want to really thank the group that's brought us University of Illinois Springfield TEDx. This is a terrific format. It's a wonderful format for a public university like the University of Illinois Springfield, because we are a place that values the public good and public discourse and a diversity of thought. This is a wonderful event. You're going to get a lot out of it. Go Stars!
Greetings and welcome to TEDxUOFIS. I'm so happy we're all here. My name is Amy Kincaid, and I am an associate professor in the Department of Communication as well as the chair. And so I guess how I kind of came into this was early fall when Antone approached me and pitched this idea about having a TEDx event at UIS. And I thought, how cool. Yes, absolutely. How can the communication department help and support you in this endeavor? And I will say we did loan our GA to them and have done some coaching and different things like that. But for the most part, it has been Antone and the rest of the planning and event staff who have really made this event go. They did all of the heavy lifting, so they definitely deserve all of the credit for this event. And I think they've done a great job. I also would like to thank everybody on that committee, but also everybody behind the scenes who has helped this event come to life. It's such an exciting thing for UIS. And I'm so happy that Antone approached me and got the comm department involved in this event. And I hope that it's something that can continue for years to come. And I know that you're in for a real treat with all of these talks. I've had the opportunity to watch a couple, not all of them, but just based on the titles alone, I think we're in for a really fun adventure with this. All right, so have fun.
Hello everyone, my name is Sudeep Sharma. I'm a faculty in College of Business at University of Illinois Springfield campus. My talk is about negotiation. The title of my talk is, Why Should We Master the Art of Negotiation? We all do negotiation for buying or selling a car. Salary negotiation is a common phenomena. We do negotiation, but there are some people who are better negotiators than others. Who are those people? Who are those negotiators? Who are effective negotiators? Why they are better than others? What they do differently? With this talk, I hope to bridge the gap between effective negotiators and ineffective negotiators. Enjoy. Thank you. Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about an interesting topic, negotiation. A topic I'm passionate about because of two reasons. First, I have been observing negotiation as well as doing negotiations since my childhood, because I born in India where people negotiate for almost everything. Merchandise, cab fare, even for vegetables and fruits, because there is literally no fixed price tag. So, the second reason why I'm passionate about this topic is because most of my research so far is on this topic, negotiation, including my doctoral research. My PhD thesis was on this topic. So what is negotiation? Negotiation is a mutual decision-making process where two or more individuals try to reach an agreement. We all do negotiation. In this country, people negotiate for cars. Selling a car, buying a car, house, we do negotiation. Even for salary negotiation, it's very common in this country. But negotiation does not happen only for economic transaction. It happens in other interaction also. For example, partners at home, they do negotiation for household work. Who will do the laundry? Who will wash the dishes? Parents negotiate with kids for screen time. Politicians, they negotiate for policy making. We regularly see in Washington, D.C. about that. they negotiate. But if you don't negotiate, or if you don't do negotiation effectively, what will happen? We will fight openly, surrender, or break off the contact. That's what we do if we don't do negotiation, or if we don't do it properly. But there are some people who are effective negotiators. Who are those people? Why they are different than many others who are not effective in negotiation? My negotiation research found that these effective negotiators do three fundamental principles. They use these three fundamental principles when they do negotiation. What are those three fundamental principles I'm going to talk about? The first is, when we do negotiation, there are two kinds of outcomes whenever we talk about negotiation. One is, we all know objective outcome, price, salary. That is a common, which we know, that objective outcomes. The second, which negotiation researchers say, social psychological outcome or subjective outcome. Trust, relationship, impression, fairness. All these are also outcomes which we look for from a negotiation. These effective negotiators know which one they should value more when they go at a bargaining table. So if you're going for a one-time negotiation, probably these effective negotiators give more value to objective outcomes than subjective outcome. But if they are thinking about long-term relationship, they value relationship, they can make a balance between subjective and objective outcome, or can give more value to subjective outcomes over objective outcomes. The second principle is about two dilemmas we always face when we negotiate with an unknown negotiator. One dilemma is called dilemma of trust. How much should we trust the other party? Whatever they are saying, is it true? And the second dilemma is dilemma of honesty. How much should we be honest? Should we tell all the information? Should we reveal everything? Or should we hide something? So these effective negotiators know how to play around with these two dilemmas. Along the same line, when we talk about negotiation, every time we just think negotiation is all about at the bargaining table. But negotiation has three stages. The first stage is called preparation. Effective negotiators prepare well for their negotiation. What is preparation then? What should we prepare for when we negotiate? There are 4 reference points which we should always have before going for negotiation. The first one is walk-away point. What price we will walk away? If a seller is giving us a price which is not in our limit, we should walk away. That should be decided before going for negotiation. The second is called target point or your aspiration point. What you target? What is your target point? That should be decided before negotiation. The third one is called alternatives. How many alternatives you have? So for example, if you're going for a job negotiation, how many job offers you have? In negotiation research, we call it BATNA, best agreement you have before negotiation agreement. So these effective negotiators play with these 3 points. They prepare well and get these 3 points very effectively. The fourth one is very important. The initial offer, the first offer. When you go to buy a car, think about it. The seller asks you, what price do you have in mind? Most of the people, they decide about that first offer at the bargaining table. It should be decided before negotiation. When someone asks you, what is your first offer, you should have a number. Why so? Because research shows that people tend to anchor that first offer, and that first offer used to decide the whole negotiation process and outcome. We generally ignore that. Even experienced researchers, experienced negotiators, they tend to be influenced by this first offer, that initial offer. So how can you get these 4 points? If you do thorough research, you get information, you can decide about these points before negotiation. Not only you can find your points, you may find walkaway point or target point of your counterpart. And then another thing which is very important, when you do research, you may know the action and behavior of your counterpart, and that can give you some sense of their personality. My own research shows that personality influences negotiation outcome. Think about a counterpart who is likable, who is agreeable. Probably for him or her, subjective values, subjective outcomes such as relationship is more important than objective outcome. But think about a negotiator who is dominant, who is assertive. For him or her, maybe objective outcomes is more important than subjective outcome. So if you have sense of direction and behavior, probably you can decide your tactics and actions at the bargaining table accordingly. Remember the last time you went for a car negotiation, how much preparation you have done. How many of you went through the website called truecar.com or cargurus.com, where you will find different MSRPs across different dealers for the same car, same color, same model? How many students know that there is a graduate discount of $500 to $1,000 for every degree they do? After graduation, they get the discount immediately if they buy the car. So once you do all these preparations, you should know to use that at the second stage, which is at bargaining table, the bargaining stage. If you do not know how to use your BUTNA, your alternatives, if you have high alternatives, for example, if you have five job offers, if you don't know how to use that power, because alternatives give you power, if you don't know how to do that, you may not be an effective negotiator. You should know how to deal with hardball tactics when someone is bullying you, or someone is giving you exploding offer. What we call exploding offer, you have 2 hours to accept or reject an offer, job offer. If you don't know how to deal with the exploding offer, effective negotiators are very good in that. They know how to deal with these things. There are some other hardball tactics like what we call bogey. You will see that many car dealers, they give you, we will give you free car floor mats, but they will not negotiate on the price. Or they will give you moving expenses. Yeah, definitely, you can get $15,000 moving expense, but they will not negotiate on salary. Or they will give you small concession. I will give you $100 off or $50 off. These effective negotiators know how to deal with these hardball tactics. And there is another important aspect. What if the other party is expressing anger a lot in negotiation? Emotions also influence the negotiation outcome. Research shows that people, when they express anger, the other party concede more. They demand less. But there is a trade-off that is on the cost of trust, relationship, which we always have. And think about it. If you do hardball tactics, if you are bully, if you express all these negative emotions, what will happen at the third stage, which we call implementation stage? You express anger, you get your deal terms, whatever you wanted, but what if the other party is not agree to implement it properly? This happens all the time. So whatever benefits you got at the bargaining stage may have cost at the implementation stage. It's important. Research shows positive emotions motivates negotiators to do implementation properly. So overall, what we have learned, we all do negotiation in our life, but we should know how to use this basic principle in every negotiation we do. If we know there are 2 kind of outcome, like objective outcome, subjective outcome, we will know how to value them. Which one we should give value more than others. If we know the dilemmas of honesty and the dilemma of trust, and we should know how to play with that, we can do better. And the third one, if you prepare well, if you know how to behave in bargaining stage, at the bargaining stage, and also at the implementation stage, we can become better negotiators. If you do that, you can learn the art of negotiation. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Meg Shadid, and I am a recent graduate of the University of Illinois at Springfield. I recently earned my master's degree in political science, and I'm currently a high school teacher in Olathe, Kansas. I teach AP Psychology and AP Government, which is part of the reason why I am going to be speaking today about one-sided facts. The title of my TED Talk is How to Combat One-Sided Facts, and I'm hoping to provide an integrated approach to this topic by taking into consideration social media algorithms, psychological biases, and how we can leverage our personal relationships to overcome and combat one-sided facts. I'm hoping today that we can bridge the gap between fact and truth.
I'm so grateful to be with you all today, and I want to spend some time talking about what I believe to be a disturbing trend, and that is an increase in the use of one-sided facts. Before we go any further, let me define what I mean when I say one-sided facts. I'm talking about selectively using facts to support an opinion. I'm talking about carefully cultivating a list of facts to support an opinion. And sometimes I'm even talking about altering or manufacturing facts to support an opinion. I think that you see this most often in our political culture here in America, but I think that the use of one-sided facts is so problematic because it's creating this chasm or this divide between fact and truth. You see, facts are powerful because of our belief that they are facts. So if we're only getting partial truths or only a snippet of the truth, really collectively as a society, we're moving further away from the truth. And before you think, oh, I know who she's talking about those people. They are really bad about using one-sided facts. I mean, I may be talking to some people more than others, but the reality is that we're all guilty of using or promoting one-sided facts, at least to some degree. Arguably, this is a product of our environment, right? We're in this age where we have more information available to us at our fingertips than ever before. And we all know that social media and powerful tech companies have created algorithms that feed us information that we are more likely to agree with. But in creating these shortcuts of navigation, we have become siloed with people who also think like us. So this collective problem, I believe, has to have a collective solution. I think that the key to combating one-sided facts is by working together, but I also think that there are 3 specific things that we can do to combat one-sided facts. But before I share those with you, I want to share a story. And I can assure you that as a high school teacher, I have no shortage of stories that I could share with you. But in this one particular instance, I was teaching AP World History. And part of that curriculum is to teach the origins of major world religions. So I was teaching about the origins of Christianity and talking about Jesus of Nazareth and how he was born a Jewish person to a Jewish family in a very Jewish context. And immediately a student disagreed with me and said, Ms. Shadid, how can that be true? How can Jesus have been Jewish? And we went back and forth, and I tried to explain everything, but he left my classroom pretty unconvinced of anything that I was trying to tell him. He came back the next day and showed me this website that he had found that proudly proclaimed Jesus was not Jewish, Jesus was a Christian. And it only took me a minute to realize that he was showing me an anti-Semitic website. Now, he didn't believe those things. He had just found something that kind of supported what he was thinking. But we sat down and I talked to him and we went through that website and looked at how they had manipulated historical facts to support their hateful opinion. We had a great conversation and he finally left my classroom being convinced of what I was trying to tell him. But this is my point, that to combat one-sided facts, it takes time, it takes honest conversations, and above all, I think that it takes personal relationships. So here are the 3 things that I think we can do to combat one-sided facts. The first thing I think we all need to do is to test our own thinking. We all know that we have biases and opinions and blind spots in our thinking. And I think that we need to adopt a spirit of humility to first look inward to see where our shortcomings may be before we can do anything else. You know, psychology has a lot to tell us about biases and thinking, but 2 I want to briefly touch on are the confirmation bias and the anchoring bias. The confirmation bias tells us that we are likely to seek out information or facts that support our opinions, and we're more likely to ignore information that is contrary to our opinions. And then the anchoring bias tells us that we give a great amount of weight to the first piece of information that we hear about a topic, and it takes a lot of work to overturn that initial piece of information. In order to overcome these biases in our thinking and other related biases, I think that we need to become more like scientists, and I think that we need to diversify our algorithms. So let's talk about being more like scientists. Scientists are naturally skeptical, right? That's kind of the whole point of the scientific method, is that they're trying to prove their hypotheses wrong in order to see if they are in fact correct. And I think that when we're talking about our political opinions, we need to do the same. We need to lay out all of the facts and information that is available to us, because we can't just ignore facts just because they don't align with our opinions. And I think that in getting all of the information out, we will be able to test our own thinking. And then I also think we need to diversify our algorithms. One place where I feel like I've been particularly successful with this is on Twitter. I follow a lot of people that I tend to agree with and a lot of people that I tend to disagree with. But I really enjoy seeing that variety in perspective and opinion, especially when a major event in our country happens, because I'm immediately able to see how people are using facts and what people are thinking. So I think after we've done this internal work, we can move to a more macro level approach. And this is where the second thing comes into play, which is leveraging our personal relationships. Okay, just think about Facebook for 1 minute. Even just in the past year, how many of you have seen a fight break out in the comments section of a Facebook post? Maybe you've been engaged with it, right? But we've all seen something like this happen, this very argumentative and combative approach to talking about political issues. And it's kind of a shame, because in this argumentation, I don't think really much is being accomplished, because the more that we dismiss and demean and other people, the more that we remain siloed to our individual ways of thinking. I'm sure just like you, I've had a lot of free time on my hands this past year, right? And one thing that I've enjoyed doing is personally messaging people on social media when they post something that I might disagree with, because I want to hear more of their perspective and I want to hear where they are coming from. Sometimes people don't message me back or they don't want to talk to me, which is fine. But I've gotten into some really rich conversations with people who I may tend to disagree with, but at the end of the day and at the end of the conversation, we're able to walk away with a better understanding of each other and of why we think the way that we do. In leveraging our personal relationships, I think we can take some good advice from best practices in the classroom. You see, before I have debates or discussions in my classroom, we always lay out ground rules. And typically these are suggested by the students themselves. So students will say, hey, before we start this conversation, we need to make sure that we're listening to each other. We need to make sure that we're respecting each other. And these things are so important. And that is the groundwork for the conversations that we should be having outside of a classroom as well. But this past fall, one of my students said something particularly insightful. He suggested that we need to be okay with changing our minds as we are debating. And I think that it's this attitude that we all need to adopt. Not only should we be willing to listen to each other, but we should be willing to learn from each other. Because all of us have something to offer, and our unique ways of thinking can help to enrich our broader society and move us back towards the truth. And that's where this third thing comes into play, focusing on the type of culture that we are creating. There's that old adage that says, never bring up politics or religion at a dinner party. And to be honest with you, I've never understood why that piece of advice was given, because I personally love talking about both politics and religion. I enjoy sharing my viewpoints, and I really enjoy hearing what others have to say as well. I think that the intention behind that piece of advice was to not offend anybody, right? Or to not get in an argument or walk away from the dinner table angry at each other. But why do we have this combative spirit when approaching these types of conversations? Instead of being focused on arguing with one another, we should be focused on listening to each other and learning from each other, and that will help us to move closer towards the truth. So in approaching these conversations, I think that we need to adopt that spirit of humility and really be willing to learn from one another. In order to bridge the gap between fact and truth, I think that we need to combat one-sided facts. And in order to combat one-sided facts, I know that we need each other. Thank you.
Now, I hate to be the one to do this, but the first half of our TEDx show has come to an end. I really hope you enjoyed the show just as much as I did. Our TEDx speakers have put in so much work throughout the year to prepare for this special day. We'll be back, so don't worry. Make sure that you guys return back to us at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. And we are going to have more speakers, and we're really excited to hear what they have to say.